everybody. It's Amanda from 171 Cedar Art Center, and I'm in our clay studio waiting to show you how to make your very own clay rattle. So our friends at the Hornell Area Concern for Youth and the Corning Youth Center, you are all going to get a kit at your youth center that looks a little bit like this. It's got a bunch of stuff in it. It's going to have clay, paintbrushes, tools, and some other things in there to help you make your very own rattle out of clay. When you're done making it, we're going to let them dry. I'm going to come back to your youth center. I'm going to pick them up. I'm going to bring them back to 171. They'll go in the kiln, they'll get fired, and then I'll drop them back off to you so that you can have your creation to have forever and ever. Some additional things that you might want while you're working is a pencil, a couple pieces of paper towel, which we're going to shred up, and what could possibly be helpful is just a small dish of water. So let's get started. You're going to take your clay out of the bag, and if it got squished on the way to you, that's okay. You just need to kind of round it back out. And before you get too carried away, we actually need to scoop some of this clay off. So I'm just going to grab a blob. I'm going to set it aside. And now I'm going to round out the rest of it. So I like to use the palm of my hand to kind of hit the clay. You could use your tabletop. You want to make sure that where you're working is kind of clean, because if you smush your clay onto dirt, it's going to pick the dirt up. Here we go. We have about an apple's worth of clay. And to make this into a pinch pot, we're going to use our thumb and we're going to poke a hole through the middle of it. Not all the way through, because then it'll be a donut, but we want to make sure that it goes pretty deep, and that way we can start to change the shape. So when you do this, you want to make sure to hold your clay in your hand and not put it down on the table, because if you put it on the table and squish your finger in there, it's going to flatten out. Try and go as deep as you can and get that hole started. It'll look a little bit like that. And then you're going to put your thumb back in there. I'm still holding it with my other hand, and I'm going to start to pinch and turn, pinch and turn. So I'm trying to hold it into kind of a round shape. You can switch hands if your hands and your fingers get tired. And if you can't reach the bottom, well, that's okay. Try and get as deep as you can. What we're trying to do is even out the walls of our pinch pot. We don't want them to be too thick, but we don't want them to be too thin either. So if you find a spot that's getting a little bit too thin, just don't pinch there anymore. Does not need to be perfectly round. It's okay if the top's uneven, because we're going to close this up. But first, we need to make some small clay balls to fit on the inside. That's what's going to help us make our rattle. So that blob that I pinched off before, this is when we're going to use that one. So I'm just going to pinch a couple different blobs of clay, maybe about pea-sized. You can do little ones if you want them to be kind of like a BB. You just don't want them to be really big. If they're really big, they could explode, and that would not be a good thing for your rattle. Our whole theme this year is exploring our senses, and for this project in particular, we're kind of looking at touch and sound. There's also some smell involved. Clay has kind of an earthy dirt smell. I like that smell personally. The touch aspect of clay is really kind of the most exciting part of it. It's squishy and soft, might feel kind of gritty. Let me show you. They look like that. They're kind of stuck together at the moment. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take that piece of paper towel that I showed you earlier. And if you have some extra, you can just kind of set that to the side for now. But I'm going to rip my paper towel apart, kind of into strips. Let's see if we can do that. And I'm going to wrap every little ball that I just made into a small piece of paper towel, and I'm going to set it inside of my pinch pot. And we want to use the paper towel because that will keep the clay from sticking together. The paper will burn out because our kiln gets over 2,000 degrees. Paper is not going to survive that, but your clay will. This part seems a little bit silly, but it is actually important. So I want to make sure to wrap every single one. And it looks a little bit messy in there, but that's okay. Once it gets fired, it will not be a problem. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to pinch the top closed. What I can do first is I can kind of cup my hands around the top of it and start to squeeze it shut. So I'm kind of squeezing and turning as I go, and that's helping to close it up. Now you can start to pinch and pull a little bit. You want to be careful not to pinch and pull too much because then you're going to rip your clay. Once you start to get pretty close to being closed, that's when you can start to just use your fingertips and blend and squeeze that clay all the way closed. So it's not going to make any noise yet, but when it comes back to you, I promise it will make noise. So at this point, you could also roll it around on the table. And if you want to change your shape so that it's not quite so round and ball-like, you could roll it back and forth. You could push down on one end over the other and start to change the shape. I'm okay with that. I want them to make sure that the bottom, however, has kind of a flat spot, because if it doesn't, it's just going to roll away on the table and it's going to be a little bit difficult to keep it still. So once you have your shape figured out, if you don't have a flat spot, all you need to do is just gently tap it on the table, and that will help to flatten it out. Just like that. Now I got a nice flat bottom. Now we get to use some of those wooden tools or some of the plastic tools that I gave you, and you can start to carve and make design marks on here. Now, if you want to kind of plan this out before you do it, you can take a scrap piece of paper and do a quick sketch. I did one earlier that has some color on it, so that's also going to help me decide how I'm going to paint this. And this is the design that I kind of came up with. I can use these wooden tools and I can carve some of these designs as well as paint them with the underglaze. So that's up to you. If you are more interested in just painting, you can paint your designs and not even really bother with the wooden tools. If you like to carve and play with the clay, this would be kind of the part that you might want to do. So I think what I'm going to try first is I'm going to use kind of this rounded end tool, and I'm going to make kind of a circle on the top. So our design inspiration kind of comes from some of the pots that are in the Rockwell's art collection. Now you may have seen them on other visits that you've made to the Rockwell, but we're also going to include some of the handouts in your kits so that you can see the designs in person. Now, seed pots were a very common thing for Native Americans to use to store their seeds in over the winter for their next harvest. And that's kind of where the idea of making a rattle came from. But they also made rattles. The rattles were used in ceremonies, and a lot of times those rattles weren't really made out of clay. They were made out of animal bones or shells. They would have handles on them and feathers, lots of different decorations. And this is kind of a hybrid, just kind of using some of the images and designs as inspiration. So I'm going to try and stick more with geometric shapes and lines, But there are some pots that have animal images on them. If you wanted to do that, you could. And if your clay starts to look like it has any little cracks or bumps on it, use your finger to help smooth those out. Your clay should still be nice and soft, so your finger is really all you need to do that part. So I just made kind of a circle at the top using one of the tools, like that. And now I'm going to use one that has this nice sharp edge on it, and I'm going to make a bunch of lines. Now I want to be careful not to carve all the way through. If you feel like your rattle is on the thin side, that's something to keep especially in mind. So there we go. Just kind of my geometric designs all the way around. Another way to use your tool instead of dragging it through is you can press it into your clay. And that's a fun way. Now, if you make a mark that you don't quite like, you can use your finger and kind of just erase it, blend it away. That is a nice feature about clay. Making designs on round things is a little tricky. Now I have kind of this zigzag diamond pattern that goes around my rattle. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make some diamond shapes, and I think I might save that part actually for my painting. There's another easy way to add some interest. Just by twisting your piece, you can make kind of this circumference or circle all the way around. So this part, you're going to need your paper plate and your pencils. Before I add my underglaze, though, this is a very important step, and I need to make sure that you all know how to do this part. You're going to use a pencil, and you're going to write your initials underneath on the bottom. Now they need to be nice and clear so that I can read them, because when they come back to 171, I need to make sure that they get back to you and that you can tell which one is yours. And it's going to be a few weeks before you get these back, so you might forget what they look like, which is why putting our names on there is super important. Now I'm going to use this paper plate to pick out my colors, and I think I want to start with blue. What you can do, your tubs of color are going to be bigger, so you're going to use a spoon and you're going to spoon it out onto your paper plate. I'm just going to use them out of my container for right now, and this is where your water might be helpful, because now you can wash your brush, and if you have another piece of paper towel, that could be helpful too. And depending on what spot you're doing, you might want to use a small brush or a big brush. I'm going to use kind of this medium-sized one, and I'm going to add blue to the top of my piece. Now, because your clay is still wet, your underglaze, this is the color meant for clay, it's paint for clay, that's going to stay wet too. So because you guys are doing these at your youth centers, you might want to come back after these have dried a little bit and do another coat of color. That's up to you. But if you do another coat of color, it's going to be brighter and it's going to look more vibrant. Now, if you just do one coat on your wet clay, I'll show you what it looks like. It's a little bit smudgy. So it's not quite as smooth of an application as it could be. Usually when you guys are here, we have just a short time to work, so we only really get to do one coat. But this is kind of an upside of being at your youth center. You have a bit more time to work on these. So you can continue to add underglaze as it dries and add layers. You don't need to add more than 3 layers of color on there, but whatever you want it to be, if you want it to be thicker, then adding another layer after it's dried a little bit will give you a bolder, brighter color. All right, guys, here I am back to show you what it looked like after I put my underglaze on here. So I put it up on the turntable. I know some of you have played with this one. You've been in the studio before. And I kept it on my paper plate. And that really helped me be able to turn my piece without having to touch it. I left some of my rattle without color on it, and that's totally fine. That just means your rattle will have that natural clay color after it's fired. Everything will have a glossy, shiny coat on it when it comes back to you. But even the parts without color will be shiny. So it's okay if you want to leave that plain. You don't have to color the whole thing. If you want to leave it kind of bare, that's okay too. Or if you want to go for full rainbow, you can cover it with the underglaze. So what I found is that because my clay is wet and the underglaze is wet, it is kind of hard to build up those layers. So you have the benefit of being able to come back to this. If you want to wait for this to dry and then do another layer, you can definitely do that, and your color is going to look a lot smoother, and it's going to be more vibrant, and it's just going to look a bit more polished. So you can color the whole thing except the bottom where you're going to put your initials so that we know whose rattle is whose. And the other thing that you can do is you can mix and match your colors. So all of those cups of color are mixable. If you have a color that you want to make, you can certainly do that just by adding a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you get a new color. They wash out, so if they get on your clothes, it's okay, it'll come out in the laundry and it'll wash off your hands if you get stuff on your hands as well. So those wooden tools and those paintbrushes are going to stay with you. After you're done, make sure that it's out somewhere where it can dry, it has your name on it, and it's still legible. That means I can read whose initials are whose. If I don't know who it belongs to, then I can't let you, or I can't give it back to you because we won't know whose is whose. So just keep that in mind. I hope you had fun making your own clay rattle. Make sure to fill out that survey at the end. It's going to be at the end of the video for you to click on. And I hope you had some fun. Stay tuned for next week, and you're going to see the Rockwell and Care first, and then we'll have even more fun the weeks after that. All right, guys. See you later. Bye.